Good morning, everybody. Enterthestars. Welcome to the show. Sorry to keep you waiting. Normally we get on here about 15 minutes earlier. But today, if you've been able to tune into the show, we're going to look at some fascinating connections between Biff Tannen of Back to the Future and some ancient characters that I believe that he possibly was based on. Now, I'm going to show you all the evidence today. We probably have about only 8 or 10 tabs that we're going to look at today. But our journey to understand Biff Tannen of Back to the Future begins here with the ancient Talmudic, we're going to call it for the rest of the show, T-Mud is just what we're going to call it. We're going to call, these are the ancient T-Mud repeaters, they're called. And they are the Tannaim. And they existed during the time of Jesus. They were part of a multi-generational, I guess we can call it ancient bloodline or ancient line of people who preserved the T-Mud so that it could be told over and over again down to the present day. And this particular generation walked the earth with Jesus. Now, I want you to understand that there were generations before and after this generation. This generation was specific. And as you can see here, they were around from 10 Christ era, 10 AD to 220 AD. Now, we're going to read about them because, in effect, what you're going to see is that they were oral time travelers. Oral, O-R-A-L. Repeating what I believe were lies about the gospel down throughout history, trying to muddy the waters through this oral repetition of history that much of it, a lot of it, does not jive with the rest of the Bible. Now, I want you to keep this in mind as we consider the connections to Biff Tannen from Back to the Future. So here's the Tannaim, and they were called the repeaters or the teachers. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see this. Let's make sure we're connected first before we keep going. No sound issues. Now, this is going to be a fascinating show, so if you were able to make it this morning, these are things that you haven't heard yet about Biff Tannen. I keep calling him Tanner, and it's Tannen. We've got a lot of tans we're going to be talking about today. By the way, when Trump gave his inaugural campaign speech, he talked about his tan from the sun god Apollo. He didn't call it Apollo, but he was basically said he was ice skating down the ramp and he got a tan from the very hot sun. So these were repeaters or teachers, rabbinic sages, whose views are recorded in the Mishnah from 10 Christ era to 220. The period of Tannaim, also referred to as the Mishnaic period, lasted about 210 years. It came after the period of Zugat and was immediately followed by the period of Amoraim, the interpreters. So there were three periods. This one was smack dab in the middle. The root Tana is the T-Mud's Aramaic equivalent for the Hebrew root Shana. So this goes on and talks about how they lived in the land of Israel and the spiritual center of Judaism. But after the destruction of the city and the Second Temple, they founded a new religious center. Some Tannaim workers worked as laborers, charcoal burners, and cobblers, in addition to their position as teachers and legislators. These are very dirty jobs, which you have to wonder. This tan word, tannic acid, is what gives color to things. Tanners actually comes from a method of tanning hides to make it darker using oak and the tannins from different vegetables and plants and trees. So you have to wonder, what does this really mean on the deeper levels? And we'll get into that later in the show this morning. So they operated under the occupation of the Roman Empire during this time. The priests of the temple became increasingly corrupt and were seen by the Jews as collaborators with the Romans. So until the days of Hillel, there were a few disagreements among rabbinic scholars. After this period, though, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai came to represent two distinct perspectives on Jewish law and disagreements between the two schools of thought. The Tannaim, as teachers of the oral law, are said to be direct transmitters of an oral tradition passed from teacher to student that was written and codified as the basis for the Mishnah. and the Tannaitic teachings of the Talmud. According to rabbinic tradition, the Tannaim were the last generation, a long sequence of oral teachers that began with Moses. Now, we can't confirm that, but what I'm getting you to understand is this was all oral tradition, and somewhere along the lines, Jesus called out a group. Now, we don't know if it was the actual Tannaim that he called out, but it was the Pharisees, and they were associated with the Talmud in this oral tradition at the time. So Jesus called them out as false teachers. Are they the same group? You have to decide that. So, you could look at this as oral time travel. So, how does Hiram Abiff of Back to the Future, or BIFF TANNEN, how does that tie in? Well, I found this CIA.gov document, and from what they're saying, let's click on this tab here. They're saying that this document was confiscated off of the hard drive of bin Laden himself in the Abbottabad compound. Here you can see here, CIA.gov /library /Abbottabad compound, right? And what this is this, they're saying this was on bin Laden's on his hard drive, is Manly P. Hall's secret teachings. And it talks about the Tannaim. It also talks about Hiram Abiff in the very same document, BIFF and Tannaim. So, was this the conglomeration of information, ancient secret mystery schools, secret societies, that was the conglomeration of the character Biff? Well, that's what we're going to get into. So, it says in here, let's do a page search for this. It says in here that the Tannaim were initiates of the Jewish mystery school, and that they alone had the secrets to understanding the Old Testament. Let's search this. I don't know why this is taking so long. Oh, here we go. Let's look at what this has to say about the Tannaim and the ancient mystery schools. Well, they even actually mention Tannhauser. We're going to look at that as well, because that was mentioned in the series Dark that was on Netflix about time travel. You see how all this is supposed to is fitting in together. Tannhauser was the name of the guy who invented the first time machine in the TV series Dark on Netflix. So it says here, thus the word of this is right out of Manly P. Hall's teachings, right? Secret teachings of all the ages. Thus the word of the Lord is the hand, or active principle by which the will of the Creator is traced upon the face of his creation. The Tannaim, or initiates of the Jewish mystery school, alone possessed a complete understanding of the significance of the Ten Commandments. These laws are esoterically related to the 10 degrees of contemplation, constituting the path of ecstasy. None of this sounds biblical at all. What you're going to notice is that all of this mysticism is mixed in with the Bible to confuse and confound you, and that's what we're getting to the bottom of today. Okay, and this is why this showed up in Back to the Future and all this. These people believe they can time travel. It says, which winds upward through the four winds and ends in the effulgence of AINSOPH. Now we know SOPH means knowledge, or to open your eyes, or to see. Ophia, that's why they name opiates after that, because your eyes become like opened. It takes you into interdimensionally through the use of these drugs. It takes you into a different place. Now, as I read this, understand that this faith, the Talmuds, they deny Christ the Savior. Okay, so when you're reading through this, understand the perspective. And there's a part here, and I'm going to quote it. Let's word search it so we can find it so you can read along. Does the mutilated condition of the Holy Bible, in part accidental, represent nonetheless a definite effort to confuse the uninitiated reader? So they're basically saying you have to be initiated. This is where this Gnostic principle comes into play. People try to call this channel a Gnostic. I go, we are not Gnostics. We are not saying that you have to know this information to be saved. This is just extra added to help strengthen your faith. But here they say if you're uninitiated, you'll never understand the Bible. This is what they're saying here. And thus better conceal the secrets of the Jewish Tannaim. Remember, the oral repeaters. Never has the Christian world been in possession of these hidden scrolls, which contain the secret doctrine of Israel. And if the Kabbalists were correct in their assumption that the lost books of the Mosaic mysteries have been woven into the fabric of the Torah, then the scriptures are veritably books within books. In rabbinical circles, the opinion is prevalent that Christendom never has understood the Old Testament and probably never will. And this is how they get away with denying Christ. They're saying we're misinterpreting it, right? But nothing could be further from the truth. Let's keep reading here. In fact, the feeling exists in some quarters, at least, that the Old Testament is the exclusive possession of the Jewish faith. So they try to claim the Old Testament as their own. Also, that Christianity, after its unrelenting persecution of the Jew, takes unwarranted liberties when it includes strictly Jewish writings in its sacred canon. But as noted by one rabbi, if Christianity must use the Jewish scriptures, it should at least strive to do so with some degree of intelligence. So they're goofing on people, right? So this document goes on. So let's summarize before we keep moving on with this. The Tannims were Christ-denying oral time travelers, preserving the lies of their faith down through time. So who is Biff? Well, let's read, because we're going to read about Hiram Abiff and a little bit of the history behind that. Now, a lot of people have touched on this character, but what I'm going to show you is that in their own words, the Masons agree that this is not the same Hiram Abiff that's in the Bible. They actually say that in this document. The Dionysiac architects constituted an ancient secret society. Now, before we go on, we've covered what a Dionysiac is. They worshipped Dionysus, the sun god. And we showed you how Dionysus syncretizes with Apollo. And we've shown you that a Dionysiac is a person that goes into this state of ecstasy and starts killing everything around it. Let's look that up, just so that you have a well-rounded picture of what this entails and who they're saying who they're saying he originated from. Hiram Abiff. Let's see if there's a Wikipedia article on it. Pull it right up. Otherwise, we're going to have to go to the Dionysus page. Okay, so here it is. Apollyon is Dionysus, is Apollo. Now you're starting to understand what is going on with the Apollo-esque type of motif going on in the 66th floor penthouse of Donald Trump. This isn't just innocent art and architecture. This is serious business. So they would go into this religious ecstasy, and this is who the people were. Let's go in here. Sorry. Find. All right. Worship and festivals. Bacchus is also syncretized with Dionysus. It's just a different version of him. There's a Greek and a Roman version of him. All right. Trying to get into this. Oh, I should just type in ecstasy. That'll find it. Dionysus uses his divine powers to drive Pentheus insane, then invites him to spy on the ecstatic rituals of the Maenads in the woods. Pentheus, hoping to witness a sexual orgy, hides himself in a tree. The Maenads spot him. Maddened by Dionysus, they take him to a mountain-dwelling lion and attack him with bare hands. Pentheus' aunts and his mother Agave are among them, and they rip him limb from limb. Agave mounts his head on a spike, takes the trophy to his father. The madness passes. Dionysus arrives in the true divine form, banishes Agave. So there's a little bit of the story behind this bloodlust, ecstatic release, or this rave culture. Here's more on it. In the graphic novel The Wicked and the Divine, the gods reincarnate as pop stars. Dionysus is the dance floor that walks like a man, associated with the ecstatic release of the rave culture in the novel. So there's more on this. It's all about this release. Here's one, ecstasy and possession. It's basically like a demon possessed thing. Now, I wish I had been more prepared. I would have gone more into this and showed you guys what this is about. But you can do your own research on what a Dionysiac is. So, back to this. He was a Dionysiac, Bacchus, worshipping architect. In principles and doctrines, much like the modern Freemasonic order, they were an organization of builders bound together by their secret knowledge of the relationship between the earthly and the divine sciences of the architectonics. They were supposedly employed by the King of Solomon in the building of the temple, although they were not Jews, nor did they worship the god of the Jews, being followers of Bacchus and Dionysus. So they were pagans. Now, later in this document, they agree that this is probably not the same Abiff or Hiram that's mentioned in the Bible that helped build the temple, okay? But because this is all basically just couched as like a satire almost. It's couched almost as though it's like a myth already before you're even out of the gate, all right? And I'm going to show that to you. The Dionysiac architects erected many of the great monuments of antiquity. They possessed a secret language and a system of marking their stones. They had annual convocations and sacred feasts. The exact nature of their doctrines is unknown. It is believed that Hiram Abiff was an initiate of this society. So, Hiram Abiff, the god-denying, Bacchus, Dionysus worshipping Masonic architect. They use satanic secret building techniques. So, Abiff was also a sun worshipper. Let's get into that. I quote, "In Masonry, the sun has many symbols. One expression of the solar energy is Solomon." Let's do a search on this. Here it talks about Solomon is the sun, and his wives and concubines are the planets, moons, asteroids. Again, this is the retelling. This isn't the biblical basis for this. This is the pagan retelling. The devil always likes to counterfeit things, right? And take it on his own. And that's what causes confusion. This is why we can't ever get on the same page. This is why when someone says, oh, Jesus the Son is just the same as the S-U-N and the S-O-N. No, they're not the same. That's the knockoff version, which is what causes confusion. Let's get into this part. Son has many symbols. Sorry guys, this is a long document, so I'm searching back through my notes here. In Masonry, the sun has many symbols. One expression of the solar energy is Solomon, according to the pagans, right? Whose name Solomon is the name for the supreme light in 3 different languages. Hiram Abiff, the sea Hiram of the Chaldees, is also a solar deity. And the story of his attack and murder by the ruffians with its solar interpretation will be found in the chapter of blah, blah, blah. So there it is right there. Sun worship at its finest. And now the complete picture is starting to emerge. Now, the Masons try to associate the pagan Hiram Abiff with the biblical Hiram of Tyre. But they acknowledge that they're 2 different men. So I can't imagine at that time that God would have approved of Solomon using a pagan to help build the temple. And this is where you got to be careful with some of these extra biblical texts as well. I know on this channel we've covered the 72 demons of the Goetia, and it is claimed that they helped build the temple under the direction of Solomon, who had a secret ring that he used to throw into the chest of the demon, and he could then command the demon. And I don't know if that extra biblical text is correct. I mean, would God really allow demons to help build his holy temple? That could be another attempt to basically smear and add shame to things that God has directed over, right? And that's what the devil likes to do. So the Masons admit that the 2 Hirams are not the same. And the Masonic Abiff, because he's martyred, and the biblical Hiram actually returns to his own land. So there are differences. So Abiff, Hiram Abiff, is basically an imposter. Just like Biff Tannen in Back to the Future. He built his wealth through a lie, which was the almanac. Do you see the connections now? Tanner, Tannaim, time travelers, orally repeating the lie over and over again. And Biff claiming credit for the millions and billions that he built on a lie. Let's pull up this article here. I don't know why my computer's going so slow today. It's never this slow. It's probably running some software in the background, but we're going to power through it. Now, if you think this is all a stretch, understand that the very writer of Back to the Future, back in 1980, when Back to the Future was written, admits that the character Biff Tannen was built on Donald Trump. This is when Trump was a nobody. In fact, in 1980, he was like 33 years old. Look at this. Back to the Future writer. Biff is Donald Trump. He says it right here. This was back in 2015. He got interviewed. And it's interesting because when you look at the backstory behind Biff, in the beginning, they say, oh, it was based off of this guy that was on the set. And he got upset about something. And so we were goofing on him. His last name was Tannen. But now, the writer, years later, he contradicts his own story. And he admits here that, yes, this was based on Donald Trump. Now, could he have changed his story? Possibly. I mean, there's possibility that he could have just changed his story. But I believe there's something more at play here. Now, let's keep going with this. Hiram Abiff was the original master builder. In today's standards, he would be considered a real estate developer, like Trump. Now, up until a few years ago, only conspiracy theorists were comparing Trump to Biff, until this article came out in 2015 admitting that Biff was Trump. So now, the builder meets the builder. Abiff meets Biff meets Trump. Now, back to this paper because it makes some interesting connections between Mason's marks and hieroglyphs from ancient Egypt. And I believe this is why the Masonic pillars look like obelisks. Let's take a look here. They talk about Cleopatra's needle and the Mason marks. All right, let's go through here. And so basically they admit in the paper that the legend of Hiram Abiff is based upon the ancient Egyptian mystery ritual of the murder and resurrection of Osiris. Let's take a look here. The curious symbols found in the base of Cleopatra's needle, now standing in Central Park, New York, were interpreted as being of the first Masonic significance. Okay. According to those who regard Masonry as an outgrowth of the secret society of architects and builders, which for thousands of years formed a caste of master craftsmen, Hiram Abiff was the Tyrian Grand Master of the worldwide organization of artisans, with headquarters in Tyre. Their philosophy consisted of incorporating into the measurements and ornamentation of temples, palaces, mausoleums, fortresses, and other public buildings their knowledge of the laws controlling the universe. Every initiated workman was given a hieroglyphic with which he marked the stones that he trewed to show to all posterity that he thus dedicated to the supreme architect of the universe each perfected product of his labor. So there you go, written in plain English. They're saying that a lot of these Egyptian, the things that were built, these buildings and obelisks and all this, may have been built by Masons from this ancient mystery school. So let's look in here because they talk about Osiris as well. Hiram Abiff is actually compared to Osiris in his resurrection of Osiris. Okay, let's find that. Chest containing. All right, here we go. As the legend of Hiram Abiff is based upon the ancient Egyptian mystery ritual of the murder and resurrection of Osiris, it is natural that the sprig of acacia should be preserved as symbolic of the resurrection of Hiram. The chest containing the body of Osiris was washed ashore near Byblos and lodged in the roots of the tamarisk or acacia. So, more connections to ancient Egyptian paganism related to Hiram Abiff. The body of the murdered god. Now, this is undoubtedly the origin of the story that a sprig of acacia marks the grave of Hiram. The mystery of the evergreen marking the grave of the dead sun god is also perpetuated in the Christmas tree. So, you notice how God tells you, do not cut a tree and make ornaments and decorate it. It says it right there. I believe it's in the book of Jeremiah. I believe. I could be wrong. But it's because these have pagan roots. This all goes back to Osiris and Hiram Abiff. Okay? This is not good. Now, the paper goes on here to mention that in the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff, the bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob are what are considered to be the three murderous agencies of society that seek to destroy truth. Let's take a look here. Because this is crazy, because this is exactly what we're going through right now. I mean, this is what's happening right now, you guys. We have the bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob. The three murderous agencies of society that seek to destroy truth, as recounted by the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff. So these people are basically replaying this ancient Egyptian paganism. The government controls the church right now. We just covered how Trump loosened up 501c3 so that he could pour money into these churches from his campaign, and that was bringing the money back into the temple. And if he can do it, you can be sure that the Dems are going to be doing it too, trying to pour money into their churches that they have controlled. And now we have the money back into the temple. It's history repeating itself almost exactly 2,000 years from the last time this happened. We have the mob, which is the people in the streets right now. And we have the tyrannical government. We got all the three elements in place, present in this reality right now. Now, many of you will remember the scene in Back to the Future 2, where you see Biff's pleasure palace, right? And in that, you see a similar three elements of chaos going on. I'm not sure the church is in that scene, but we do have the mob and we have the tyrannical government. There are tanks rolling through the street. You also see a mob. It's like do what thou wilt, just chaos in the streets. Now, there are other consistencies between Biff Tannen and Hiram Abiff. Biff lives on Mason Street. Okay? Biff Tannen lives on Mason Street. I looked back through this here. You can read all about Biff Tannen and all the comparisons to him in Futurepedia. I think this is Back to the Future. Everything about Biff Tannen. And Biff was a young bully, just like Trump was a young bully. All of his school friends admitted that he was. Now, Biff also had this fist cane in this 78-year-old version of himself. This cane that he had looks like a fist or like a knuckle. Let me show that to you. Here it is here. This is Biff Tannen's fist cane. Here you can see him holding it right here. So what, Casey? Well, what do we always see Trump doing with his fists? Fist pumps, right? I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen a president do this before. So it's not like, oh, this is just a common thing that presidents do. No, there's something weird about this whole fist pump thing. And let's see, I think I saw some more images here. Biff likes to take his knuckles and rub them on people's head and ask if anybody's home. So you get all these comparisons as to what's going on. There was another slide here I wanted to show you guys. It was like a Biff montage. That was pretty interesting. So here's Trump doing the same thing with these fist pumps, right? So there are a lot of similarities. Now, according to the history of Biff, they talk about when he got his money. He got rich in 1958, which was the year that he turned 21. And you can see this, I think it's in Back to the Future 2. You can see that Biff gets rich in 1958. Well, what's the significance of 1958? The significance of 1958 is the number 58, because there were 58 bedrooms in Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach. There's 58 stories in Trump Tower. He actually won the 58th presidential election. No, he's not the 58th president. He won the 58th presidential election. If you don't know what that means, go look it up. And there was a 1958 Western that mentions Trump by name, not the Trump, but some kind of archetype of him, and talks about him promising these people that he's going to build a wall, right? And everybody knows that Western because it's been covered many, many, many times. But there are a lot of the number 58 that relates exactly back to Trump. So here's the fist. I wanted to make sure you guys saw this because this was very intriguing and interesting for me as well. This whole fist thing. Here's what I wanted to show you. See how he takes the fist and he rubs it on the head? He's like, is anybody home? Because his fist is too frail at 78 years old. Now, I think, isn't Trump 78 right now? I think he might be. All right, let's keep going with this because there's more. Now, according to this history of BIFF, and you can read through this at your leisure to confirm what I'm saying. BIFF actually repeals presidential term limits. And there's some blurb in here about Nixon and how Nixon ends up getting reelected because they do away with term limits. And BIFF actually in here, in his history, actually tried to become president at one time. Interesting, right? Now in 1986, BIFF's long reign of terror finally came to an end when, in an attempt to visit 1996 in order to obtain future information to help him become president of the United States in 1988, he was instead temporarily sent back by Doc Brown to 1884, where he was murdered by his great-grandfather, Buford TANNEN, upon calling him Mad Dog. So that was his presidential aspirations. And of course, those of you with eyes to see understand that this number 88 is very important. The number 88 is the number of time travel. It is the number of time and space. This is why the DeLorean had to get up to 88 miles an hour to jump through time. Okay? And you're going to see this number 88 repeating over and over again. But here's the blurb about BIFF's aspirations of becoming the President of the United States. Now back to this paper, because it continues on with its blasphemy by trying to indicate that Jesus was a myth and that was based on a pre-existing Enlightenment model. So we're going to read now about that. Let's go in here, find it. Now, we know, of course, that nothing predates Genesis, which they were already alluding to messianic prophecy in the book of Genesis. All of us know that. And the devil's always trying to hijack and counterfeit Jesus to make you doubt him. So it's more truth mixed with lies, as the paper goes into more details about a mark on the forehead, the letter T or Tav, which is more T rump and T tanner references, Tannen references. Let's find Jesus Christ in here. So of course the devil's going to want to do this because he's going to want to hijack the Christ story. Okay? So I'm not going to go into like the details of this, but just know that they're trying to dovetail Christ with these and syncretize this Christ figure, the Christ that we know, with these other figures, these pagan symbols, right? And this is very dangerous stuff, because the second you start denying Christ or thinking he's another god, that would be under blasphemy, right? All right, let's get into this here. I can't find my space here. This is a huge document, you guys, so bear with me as we muddle through this. Let's see here. Let's type in this. All right, let's type in Tav. Now, there's a part in here, if I can find it, talking about the Tav. And this is interesting because the Tav is a cross. It's like a mark. And the farmers would use it to try to make... The origin of this is that farmers were trying to use this to mark the furrows of their field to make sure that they were straight and lined up. They would put this mark at the end of the field. So they mention that in here. Now, this is interesting because we were just talking about Tavs in the shape of the crossing eclipses. That's what a Tav looks like. And we made a pretty big deal out of it. And some people thought, well, you're crazy. Just because these are the eclipses that happened that Jesus was able to view during his life before he was crucified, just because they cross perfectly, that doesn't mean anything. Well, it means everything, because it's a tav. These are time markers in history. As these eclipses basically form over the earth, and there's a crossing point at the eclipse. And these are markers in history is what they are. And that's why 2 eclipses crossed during Jesus' lifetime. We have 2 more eclipses that are going to cross right over the United States. One happened on August 21st, 2017. The other one has not happened yet. But both cross in a place called Makanda, Illinois. That's where the crossing point is. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the show, but let's read about the Tav and what they have to say in this. There are 3 distinct forms of the cross. The first is called the Tau, more correctly, the Tav. It closely resembles the modern letter T. That's one image of it, but it also looks like just a simple X, consisting of a horizontal bar resting on a vertical column, the 2 arms being of equal length. An oak tree cut off some feet above ground and its upper part laid across the lower. In this form was the symbol of the Druid god Hu. It is suspected that the symbol originated among the Egyptians from the spread of the horns of a bull or ram, Taurus or Aries, in the vertical line of its face. This is sometimes designated as the hammer cross because if held by its vertical base, it is not unlike a mallet or gavel. In one of the Kabbalistic Masonic legends, Abiff is given a hammer in the form of a Tau by his ancestor Tubal Cain. The Tau cross is preserved to modern masonry under the symbol of the T-square. This appears to be the oldest form of the cross extant. So, this is a very important symbol going back through history, and it is very closely associated with Hiram Abiff. Another connection, because what is Trump's symbol? It is the T, right? Now people say, oh, that's just the beginning and first letter of his last name. Well, there may be more to that. He's the builder. He's Hiram Abiff. And he's got the Tau as his moniker, as his symbol. Okay, so there may be more to this than meets the eye. All right, what else do we have here? Now, how far are we off of the mark when it comes to the BIFF TANNEN connections to time travel? Well, obviously we're not very far off the mark at all, because the Netflix series Dark profiled a Tannhaus character that built the very first time machine. I'm going to show that to you right now. This is Tannhaus from the Dark series. He built this time machine. There you can see he wrote a book, H.G. Tannhaus. There's something to this. It's time travel. And he was looking into wormholes, and then he built this little time machine. Then he built a bigger one later in his life. And this is the story behind the series Dark. Now, I think they've got this to where it's dubbed. When I first watched the first season, there was no dubbing, and I had to muddle through reading these, the little closed caption in the bottom, which is a pain. But there are images in here almost as though they're looking at the future as well. The main character wears a face mask as he's going through a post-apocalyptic world when he jumps through time after the nuclear power plant explodes and the whole world is basically corrupted and everything's dead. Here's the time machine here, the Tannhaus built. And the time traveler in this series, his name is Noah. This is all about the waters, or Jonah. His name is Jonas, but then there's another counterpart to him named Noah. So that you got these 2 water characters from the Bible that are named here. Now, this is Tannen, and it's a monster. Look at this. A sea monster in the Canaanite, Phoenician, Hebrew mythology. And it is used as a symbol of chaos and evil. The Tannen dragon, from the root meaning howling, or from coiling like smoke. It means crocodile. And it appears in the Baal cycle as one of the servants of Yam defeated by Baal. Unbelievable. Depicted as a serpent. And this is the actual word that appears in Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Psalms. This is the word that's used for Leviathan, or these great whales. It's called Tannin. Now, are you seeing how this all connects? Jonah was in the belly of the whale. Tannins, which were these serpent dragons. Okay? There's something to this. Was Jonah not in the belly of a whale, but was he in some kind of time loop? Was that what he really was when he was swallowed by this whale, we're told? Now, I'm not sure if the word tannin is used as Jonah's whale. Let's see if it's in the book here. See if it mentions it here. Job, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. It does not look. It looks like it's a different great whales, it says here. We'll have to look at that in a different show. But isn't this interesting? Interesting stuff. The 3 days. Okay, Jesus says, I am greater than Jonah. He mentions Jonah in his ministry. And what happened to Jesus? He died and was dead for, 3 days. And then he was resurrected, right? Well, there's something about that. Where was he during that time? Some kind of time slip. Well, we know where he was. He was probably with the Father. But isn't this interesting? Rebuilt the temple in 3 days. So, there's something to this. Let's keep going with this. Now, we were talking about these crossing eclipses, right? And I think I've got... Oh, where did it go? Dang it. We just did a show on crossing eclipses, right? And we just talked about the 2 eclipses that are going to be crossing in Makanda, Illinois. And we know that the Makeda, which was the name of the queen that ruled over ancient Ethiopia, right? And she was with Solomon and they had a child. Well, the last time we had these crossing eclipses was during the time of Christ. And in this realm of Makeda, her realm that she ruled over at Marib, a place called Marib where there's a dam. We covered all that in the other shows. Well, doesn't Makanda sound a lot like Makeda? So we have another crossing eclipse, and I don't know what's going to happen when this eclipse crosses over in 2024. But needless to say, we will be watching. I believe it happens on April 8th, 2024. That's just a few short years away. All right, so what else do we have here in these tabs? This is the Tav mark I was showing you. It looks just like these crossing eclipses. Now, I wasn't the only person to notice the Tav and how it looks like the crossing eclipses. Somebody else noticed this, and this was sent to me by a subscriber. They sent me this link, and look at this. This site actually found something similar. I don't agree with everything on this site, but they call out the fact that the Tavs look like crossing eclipses, which is what we had just discovered ourselves through our own research. The Paleo-Hebrew Tav. And it talks about the 4 Tavs at the end of the age. Let's make this bigger. And one of those crossing eclipses is the one we just mentioned. 2017 and 2024 going over the United States. This site is saying that marks us as Babylon the Great. And guess what? It kind of does, because we just let the money back into the church. Here's one that happened in 2006 on the 88th day of the year, by the way, 3/29. And then another one crossed it on Turkey's been in the news, hasn't it? Here's another one at the North Pole. So this is an interesting paper here, an interesting site, because it might help us draw insight as to what's going on. Here is the crossing eclipse that's going to happen, or that we're in the midst of now. So 2017, we're in 2020. We're about halfway there, aren't we? Wow. We are about halfway between these two eclipses. And this is when everything went off the rails with the CV and the lockdowns and the this and the that, right? Loss of all of our rights. So, very amazing discovery that these folks made. I don't know who these people are, but thanks to the subscriber who helped me find this. Here's another crossing one that's going to happen in 2027 and 2034. This one crosses very close to the one we found down here, that crossed down here in Marib, Yemen. Remember? That's the one we found. And this happened during the time of Christ's life. And now we've got another one just across the Red Sea, and it also crosses in the near future. So there's something to this. There's a code to this. And we're going to figure out what it is eventually. We'll get down to the bottom of it. Now, let's see what else we have. Oh, I was going to tell you that I believe that these crossing eclipses, they mark important events in time. Almost as if God knew they would happen, or he somehow preordained them. You know, like the coming of Christ, the one that we found. It happened just before or right around the time he was a child, these crossing eclipses. Or, you know, the changing of America forever with this recent CV spamdemic. That has been marked by these two eclipses, has it not? This huge event that changed the course of the history of America forever. For the first time in our history, we've given up our rights due to this boogeyman called the CV. All right, what else do we have here? Now, our story ends today, and I hope I did this topic justice. This stuff is hard to pull together, but there are some very definitive connections. The story ends with one last tanner. His name was Simon, and he lived by the sea, right? Sea monsters, right? He tanned animal skins, which was a very dirty process. It was disliked by the Jews as unclean. Now, Peter stayed with Simon the tanner, and God sent Peter a vision of clean and unclean animals being lowered down from heaven in like a sheet. All this is in the Bible. See if I can find the vision here. Peter's vision of a sheet with animals. It's been depicted in art depictions. Here's one depiction of it here. Now, God told Peter to eat these animals, but Peter refused because he said some of those animals are unclean. But when he awoke, he realized that God was really showing him that there was a shift in the salvation plan, or at least a revelation of the salvation plan, and that salvation was now for the clean and the unclean, the Jews and the Gentiles, only if they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, this is fascinating stuff, because if you think about it, our animal hides are metaphors for animal skin. And if you think about the very unclean process of tanning a hide, that kind of sounds like being rendered clean under Christ, even though our hide is very unclean, like the tanning process, our skins, right? So, fascinating stuff. Again, I'll link all this in the pinned comment for those of you that want to dig deeper into all this. Here's another image of Peter's vision, the unclean animals. If you look in here, there's actually some animals, like there's unicorns in here and stuff. Crazy animals that don't exist anymore, right? Look at this. Elephants, lions. There's an ostrich, unicorns. Interesting. Now, of course, this image is much later in history. When was this dated? Oh, look, they've got like a dog in here too. Is that like a little dog? It's a funny looking dog. That looks like a cat. But look, what is this? Is that like a deer? Or an elk? Why would that be in there? It's unclean. There's a bear. Obviously, that's unclean. I don't know if every single animal pictured here is supposed to be unclean, because that would be weird, because there's a deer, right? Why would a deer be unclean? There's a turtle. It's like looking like Where's Waldo, right? So, what else do we have here? Oh, here's Makanda, Illinois. This will be where the eclipses cross. Now, we did a video on this. I think we were the first ones to kind of talk about this and kind of bring it to the truth community. A lot of other channels followed suit. Why were we talking about the eclipse, the first eclipse in 2017 that would form the marking of the two eclipses? Well, because NASA had launched off these balloons during the eclipse, and so we started digging into eclipses, and we found the other eclipse that's going to cross it. Okay. And also, I think it was in the news, they were talking about how where the center of this eclipse would cross. So this was kind of in the news. But here's Makanda, Illinois. What's this? Oh, here's an old article about Makanda. There's some kind of boardwalk there, and they talk about it being a magical trip back in time. Right? Kind of weird with all this time travel stuff we've been talking about. And apparently the guy's selling it, this place. Makanda Boardwalk, a magical trip back in time. Selling it for $275,000. The LL Bell building. Bell. Anyway, let's refresh this, pull these pictures up. So you can put your thoughts in the chat. I'll be in there in a second, as soon as we finish looking at some of these images, and get caught up with you guys. Here it is. Here, this is called the LL Bell building, which is weird. Kind of reminds me of a TV series I used to watch. There was a guy named Bell, Alexander Bell, I think it was. And they had jump rooms and elevators and time travel. So isn't that weird? This is where the eclipses will cross. 2024. It's very artsy there. They got like an art studio. Place where you can get ice cream and all kinds of stuff. Here's the guy I think that's selling it. What else do we have here? Makanda prepares for first of 2 total solar eclipses, so they know it's coming. And it's a very small town. Only 547 people. How does a small town of artists prepare to be inundated by thousands on the day of the Great American Eclipse? They get creative. So this was the eclipse of 2017 that they're talking about here. I like making things, says Makanda Eclipse Coordinator. Wow, they have a Makanda Eclipse Coordinator. Joe McFarlane. I came up with some slogans for our little village. Made some t-shirts, designs, things like that. Whoa, look at this. Be nowhere else on Earth. This is a famous art piece. Can't think of the artist, but there they show the eclipse above. This is a very famous art piece. For those of you that know what this is, with the man holding his face, chime in the chat so everybody else can figure it out. The small town bills itself as the Eclipse Crossroads based on its unique location centered in the paths of totality of the 2017 and 2024 eclipses. This little spot called Makanda has not seen a total solar eclipse since 1442. I believe it was, which was 9 years before Christopher Columbus was born. Wow, interesting. So they talk about this. Now, I'm wondering what the middle point is between these two eclipses, the exact day, smack dab in the middle between these two eclipses. And if my computer was running better right now, I would pull that up right now and show that to you. But as soon as I get off the show, I'm going to find the exact center date between those two eclipses, and we are going to see what that date lines up on. If that date becomes March 13th, 2020, I'm going to fall out of my chair, because that's the day that Trump declared the national emergency on Friday the 13th of March. We'll see, and I'll put that in the pinned comment along with the links so you guys can see that as well. Appreciate everybody coming to the show. If you're new to the channel, we go live every single weekday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be here every time for you guys, every day, talking about various topics. It all depends on what's in the news and what we're talking about. But all right, I think we're going to end the stream here. I'm going to look at that center date, see if I can figure it out, and I'll be back on here with you guys tomorrow. I think tomorrow we're talking, I've got a premiere scheduled for tomorrow, and it's basically, there are two bloodlines that originated mankind, and it goes 7 generations of twins, doppelgangers. Yes, the first 7 generations of Adam's bloodline mirrors this first 7 generations of Cain's bloodlines. In fact, the people that were born the first 7 generations almost have the same exact names on both sides of the bloodline. And that's fascinating, because no one really talks about this, that this happened during the age of Gemini, where Gemini was dominant on the horizon at morning and evening. And this is because of precession. And so here we have the beginning of humanity, and we have this Gemini effect occurring. And we're going to talk about all of that on tomorrow's show. Take care and be safe, you guys. Much love.